Welcome to Journals of Self-Discovery. Hello, and thanks for joining me for this month's episode of Journals of Spiritual Discovery. Before we begin, let me remind you of a couple of things. One is that the TAT Foundation Retreat Weekend is coming up soon. It's March 31st through April the 2nd. Paul Resendez, Tess Hughes, Paul Constant, and myself will all be there. You can learn more about this by going to tatfoundation.org and clicking on current events on the menu. Also, I want to encourage you to check out the podcast page on the website, spiritualteachers.org, where you can see the show notes for each episode. And there you'll see highlights of what I thought were some of the more interesting parts of the interviews, as well as other resources. You can see that at spiritualteachers.org/podcast. My guest this month is Eddie Traversa. I met Eddie through a mutual friend sometime in the mid-2000s, but this was actually our first live conversation. We delve into his spiritual search, his current views on awakening, and have a very honest conversation about what practically he can do to help people get unstuck. Hope you enjoyed this episode with Eddie Traversa. Well, Eddie, thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking the time.
I'm glad to be here. I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm thinking that my Australian accent might woo the whole of the world, and so I just hope people get used to my accent and understand me clearly.
Oh, I think
I'm sure we'll get there.
I think you're right. I think it'll be a plus for the interview.
We'll see.
Yeah, the only trouble with you being in Australia was that we were going to do this interview yesterday, and somehow, despite all the powers of the internet, I miscalculated what time it actually was in Australia, and we were 2 hours off, I think, and what time we actually thought it was.
Daylight savings. That's the problem. I've got clients from all around the world, but particularly in America, and whenever we first start up, it takes an enormous amount of time to work out the right time. So.
Yeah. So I just wanted to start basically at the beginning, just to get a sense of your history, and I would like to know if when you look back, if there's a point in time that you could identify that's when your spiritual search began.
It's a tricky question because I actually had several points where I think I kind of built up into it. And they're all interconnected. But I do have one point in particular where I think I got as serious as one could be, and that's probably what I might talk about, if that's okay. So I was on a plane, basically, and coming back from Canada. I lived in Canada for a few years with a girl, and I was distraught. I wanted to cry. And, being a man, it was kind of like, oh, don't cry, people will see you. So there was this tension between crying and not crying. And the reason why I wanted to cry was that I felt just so much like a failure in life. I felt really low, really bad about myself. I'm pretty sure that if I had a gun, I would have blown my head off at that time. That's how bad it was. And the reason I felt so bad was basically I was coming back to Australia without a cent to my name and my tail between my legs, and I'd been in this relationship, and a few weeks prior I had a heart attack. It was the first of my heart attacks. And my girlfriend then, after the heart attack, probably about a week after, wanted to end it. And I thought, what? So basically, she wanted to end it, and I decided, well, that's enough. I had enough of her and was coming back to Australia. So in the midst of all this kind of what's the right word, sadness, being really distraught, I had this moment where I kind of like thought, this has happened before in my life. I felt this low a couple of times before in my life. And, I'm a psychologist. I read a lot. I think I'm pretty self-aware. I don't do anything untowards in a relationship. I treat people really as well as I possibly can. I'm knowledgeable. And yet I keep coming back to this point where the bottom falls out of my life. And I had this moment where it's hard to explain, but it was at a cellular level where I thought, it's all a lie. Everything that I've been taught is all a lie. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. I thought my mum's lied to me, my parents have lied to me, my psychology teachers have lied to me. They've kind of like said, if you live life a certain way, it's going to be good. And to me, it was like, well, I'm the living proof that it's not. And from that point forward, I kind of like thought, you know what, I'm going to figure out life on my own. And I didn't start off as a spiritual search, although it was quite spiritual in the end. It started off like my question, if you like, was how does life work? And that's what really drove me. And when I say drove me, I was like a madman. I was intense to the max. I just shut everything else out in my life and just focused on that. So that's pretty much a story, the turning point, if you like.
You were already a trained psychotherapist at that point, correct?
Yes, I was.
Did you have to turn towards a new set of tools, or were you able to use that knowledge in your search?
Well, originally, I saw like when the bottom fell out, if you like, it was kind of like nothing works. So I kind of like threw everything out that was in my mind and what I thought was true and what I thought worked. And I was anti-psychology at that time. Just because I thought, it's basically let me down. But as time wore on and the bitterness kind of like wore out of that, I started to pick up bits and pieces of it again. But I also turned to the more mystical side of things. I was deeply fascinated and always have been with like what you would call ESP, out-of-body experiences, things like that. Near-death experiences was another one that I was interested in. Telepathy, and it was more about what is the human potential. What is actually there? What can we actually do? And so I started reading in a lot of diverse sort of fields. I like the Sufis. I like the Tao. That's my favourite book. The Tao Te Ching. And so there were things like that I read that incorporated in with psychology, and also a bit more like I was a bit more kind of like hyper aware about not getting things in that weren't beneficial to me, where I wanted to be in life.
Could you tell me a little bit more about that last part? I wasn't quite clear on things that not letting things in that weren't beneficial to your life. Is that what you said?
Yeah, pretty much. So to me, like at that point in time, it was like, how do I really become happy in life? How do I kind of like find a place where I'm comfortable with myself, at peace with myself, where I don't run into relationship problems and I don't run into business problems. And so it's backtracking a lot over my life and kind of like picking up things that, okay, this worked and this didn't. And so an example of that would be, I'll get into the mystical here a little bit, but so I had a former relationship and it ended really badly. It was probably the worst breakup of my life. But as a consequence of that, I got into ESP a lot, and in particularly about influencing people with your mind, if you like. And so I was doing a lot of research, and then I started experimenting. And I did this kind of like thing with magic, where I did this ritual, and it was a very intense experience for me. But it seemed that it actually worked and that I was actually influencing her. It was really a neediness of wanting her back type of thing.
Sure.
So it wasn't, a really healthy type of mentality I had at the time. But I did find that I could actually influence her. But the influence on her seemed to have a very bad effect on her, so I stopped it. And didn't pick that up again for a long time. But I thought, that actually worked. I wonder if that's worth exploring a bit more and seeing what's actually there, sort of thing. So it's those sorts of things. And in psychology, it was, let's kind of like relax a bit more and not take things so seriously and be a bit more positive. That seems to work. So I picked that up. And then I read other bits and pieces here and there and integrated them as well.
Is that something that you can say, I spent X number of years working on that sort of thing, and then I came to some resolution? Or
well, I came to some resolution rather quickly because it works. But the thing that I had in mind was, are there better ways of influencing people? And it wasn't so much that I wanted to manipulate people. I just wanted to explore what is the human mind capable of. So it was kind of like that. And, in particular, what is Eddie capable of? And so one of the things about me is that I can be quite scattered in my approach to life. So when I say I focus, I've usually got 3 or 4 things that I focus on at a time. And I tend to kind of like work on one thing for a couple of days, and then the next thing might catch my attention. It's all about the other thing.
Mm-hmm.
So this whole magic kind of like other mind, something greater than myself type of thing was something that magic started, but it kind of like grew into more of an identity issue, in a sense of like, what am I really capable of? What is anyone really capable of? And how I resolved it is that I had quite a traumatic childhood in lots of ways, and so one of the things that happens with trauma people, in my experience, is that their boundaries get very loose and they're not very clear, and that you often find that people who have been traumatized can pick up things from others that they normally shouldn't be able to have access to, or the convention says that they normally shouldn't have access to. And to my way of thinking, it's because of these loose boundaries that form very early on in childhood. So I thought about that in terms of my experience, and thought, that kind of like fits with me, it resonates with me.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, it was like, okay, so if there's something greater, what is this greater? Where is this stuff actually coming from? And that's where you get tricky, because you can't find an answer from the rational mind perspective.
It's an interesting transition to me, because some people might have stopped at, I've gained some control over my life and I understand more the mechanisms that the levers that I could pull to make myself more happy in the world. But it sounds like for some reason that wasn't enough for you.
Yeah, well, nothing was ever enough for me. So I'm like a very extreme sort of guy. Well, I was. I can't say that I'm that extreme now, but definitely I worked on extremes. So when I tended to do stuff, it was kind of like an all or nothing mentality. So kind of like your teacher, Rose, kind of like emphasised grit and purity of intent and purity of purpose, where you've got to be so focused on something that you're almost driven by madness to attain it. And at that time, that's how it was. Like, I had a heart attack, and I picked up smoking again. I was smoking cigarettes at the time. I pretty much locked myself in a room, read everything I could, didn't interact much with the world. I became kind of like almost a hermit in a lot of sense. So I was driven, and not driven for a great purpose, or like I say, I was driven by happiness, but it was also I was driven by the fear and the sadness and the misery that I experienced in life, and I just didn't want to experience that again, ever again. So it was either do it or die to me. And, that whole mystical ESP, kind of like greater than other sort of experience is part of that. It's kind of like, I think for anyone, wanting to explore stuff like that, don't stop. Just keep going.
And that led you rather than a sense of Eddie, the person, has some great power. It sounds like you recognize that there was something else at work, something larger than yourself. Is that true?
Yeah. And also to me at the time, it was like, what are the boundaries? The boundaries were just not clear about who was doing what. So was it Eddie doing something? Or was it God or the Absolute or, the universe, whatever you want to call it, doing something? It just was not clear at all. I only recognised that something was happening behind the scenes. And I had a couple of moments of, glimpses, if you like, where amidst this kind of like drivenness and sadness, and there were moments of beauty as well. And I also wanted to explore that. It's kind of like, well, here's the answer. But to be clear, I was kind of like trying to control my life. And I was after a magic pill solution. I kind of like wanted, well, if I find the answer, then everything's going to be okay. So a lot of that was driven by that.
Can you talk a little more about how you explored that? I understand that you were, say, doing experiments with ESP and so forth. How did you dig deeper into that question of what is this other or higher power that may be behind this? Were you meditating? Reading books can only do so much.
Absolutely, I totally agree with you. And looking back, it was kind of like, dude, you just read so much stuff that was just rubbish, It just wasted time, basically. I was doing Tai Chi at the time, so that helped a little bit. It kind of like, it focused me more on a meditative type of quality of life. And I noticed in Tai Chi, the energy of Tai Chi itself started to interest me. Like if you move your hand in a certain way, you'd experience a kind of jolt of energy. Chi, they call it. And so I was like, I wonder what that's about. And so I started to read a little bit about Tai Chi, a bit more in depth about Tai Chi. I was quite versed in it, but I read more in depth about it. And I wanted to explore this kind of like the energy and making yourself kind of like use the energy to the benefit of myself and also for the benefit of others that I interacted with. I didn't come to any great resolution. It was just more like a practice, if you like, of just noticing the energy and not really knowing quite what to do with it in lots of ways. So I just sat there for, I don't know, years and years and years. So I would often have experiences of, a tingly sort of sensation, but my whole skin would be tingly, and it was a very pleasant sensation. But when doing Tai Chi, that would often transpire. So again, I didn't come to any great resolution or any great understanding about this energy. It was just that it was there, I was aware of it, but wasn't quite sure what to do with it. Whereas other areas of life, I kind of like figured out, I had to go back to my childhood again. So I actually had done blocks of therapy before and explored things in my childhood and how they affected me. And I went back into therapy again after I came back from Canada and was exploring myself again from that perspective as well. And noticed things about myself that were kind of true-ish, if you like. How I interacted in relationships and my selection process in picking out people. Things like that helped. Like the selection process helped a lot. Just recognising that my selection process was off in some way and in some ways got to be remedied or kind of like worked on, or stop picking the people that aren't going to give you what you want in life.
Mm-hmm.
There were a lot of things that were coalescing. So it wasn't one thing where I could say, well, this one thing kind of like, really kind of like got my attention, and I just stuck at this particular one thing. It was more like there was a jumble of things that caught my attention, and I was exploring each, and some of them caught my attention a little bit more than others. But there's this switching between things a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually think that helped.
I know one thing that some people struggle with is they don't know what to do next. They feel like they're at a dead end or they're stuck. Did you ever? It doesn't sound like that was a problem for you. It sounds like you always had something that you wanted to explore. Is that true?
There were times in life where I felt stuck, so there's no doubt about that. And there were times in my life where I felt my hands in the air, if you like, and just did not know what to do. And again, we were talking about ends of relationships were the ones that really caused me the most problems in life, but at the same time caused me to seek. But I remember one particular relationship ending where I cried for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. So I'd literally go to bed at night crying and wake up crying. And I just did not know what to do with life. But it lasted for a couple of weeks, and then slowly but surely, that kind of like motivation to kind of like keep going arose again. But I actually should mention this, because I know where it stems from as I'm talking. So when I was about 30, yet another relationship ending. And so we're talking about giving up and all that sort of stuff. And so I tried to commit suicide. So it was a pretty serious attempt. And I went to bed thinking that I would die. I took a massive amount of pills and alcohol and all that. So I literally gave up. And I woke up the next morning and thought, oh my God, I can't even get that right, sort of thing. But then I'm not even sure why, but I promised myself, it was more like a vow. A vow is a good word for it. I promised myself that I would never do that again. That I would never ever give up. And that's stuck. So there were definitely times after that where I felt like killing myself, which is a lot about my esteem and my state of mind and all that. But there was also this other aspect of me that I would just not give up. So that stemmed from that suicide attempt that kind of like, and when I got that off that plane, yes, I, basically slept for a week and didn't want to do anything. Then I got up and started to read and kind of like started to, and when I say read books, but it was also thinking about things. So in that sense, it was meditative in the sense that I would ponder my life. It was a very introspective kind of period in my life. Yeah, but that's what would make me kind of like keep going, was that vow I made to myself.
Now, did you have any spiritual teachers that you were in contact with during that time?
Absolutely no, not at all. I was like a spiritual novice. I'm amazed. Like when I have clients, I work with people from as a psychotherapist, and sometimes people will write to me, and I'm amazed at some of their spiritual experiences and working with teachers and all that. But I had none of that. But in a way, I'm glad I didn't, because I think it can lock you into a particular way of looking at the world rather than exploring it. And while a teacher can be very helpful as a guide and all that, sometimes it can get in the way as well. And for me too, you've got to remember that like my vow on that plane was kind of like, also, I'm not going to listen to anyone else. I'm going to work this out on my own. And so I didn't come back to Australia. I went into therapy because I had all these suicidal thoughts at that time. So I recognised that I needed help with that. But other than that, it was like, no, I'm just going to work at this by myself. Having said that, I had a friend who was very spiritual, and we used to talk about spiritual matters, and that was really helpful. So there wasn't a formal teacher as such, but there was people around me. Like my therapist at the time was very helpful. A couple of my friends were very helpful. Both very spiritual people, and we used to have these deepish sort of conversations about spirituality, which caused me to think and introspect and think about what am I about, what is life about, all that sort of thing. And I didn't kind of like accept everything they said, but I pondered it.
Mm-hmm.
So to answer your question, no, there wasn't a formal spiritual teacher, but there were lots of little guides here and there that I think helped.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's certainly something in my life that, in addition to knowing a handful of valuable spiritual teachers, there were a lot of people who were just friends that in their own way were incredibly helpful.
And the value too of friendships too, if you've got really good ones, is they don't let you get away with too much. And so I mean, you might get mad at the time, and you mightn't really particularly enjoy what they tell you, but if you've got any sense of like deepness or willing to explore yourself, you take it on board.
Mm-hmm.
And you use that to kind of like to help yourself get to where you want in life.
Mm-hmm.
So friendships are, to me, are really valuable, as are other people that come in and out of your life. Not just friendships, but sometimes you have these fleeting sort of people that just come into your life for a day or a week, and they might say something and it sticks, and you go off and kind of like, oh, I want to explore that. So an incident of that was I came across a friend of a friend sort of thing that I barely knew and don't have much contact with. And she mentioned the whole creating reality field. And so I started to explore that. And she was kind of like a guide, in a sense of like she pointed me to something that I didn't particularly consider before. So I was like, okay, this sounds like it might be interesting. And I've got to say, a lot of that creating reality sort of stuff, new age mentality, is just rubbish, junk. But I explored it still, and there were things out of that I could use today.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I would be able to make later on was connections. So in psychology, there's this thing about kind of like getting the life that you want as well. We just don't call it creating reality. So that tied in with kind of like, how do I get what I want out of my life? And I've got to mention this, that before kind of like, it wasn't that I actually got an answer to this. Like, there's no magic pill, there's no one-shot solution, no formula that I know of that is a guarantee for success in life. And success in life can be a spiritual goal as well as a materialistic one. I don't know of anything like that. But I think I'm reasonably good at working out some of the steps that might really help the person get to where they want. It's no guarantee, but probably increases their probability is a good way of thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And the same applies to me. So it's really, you've got to apply it in your own life. You've got to really experiment and just see what works and what doesn't work. And the other thing too that I would mention about that is, I might give you advice about life, but it mightn't ring true for you. And that's because you'd have a different makeup, a different kind of like way of looking at things, orientation towards life. It might not resonate. Whereas for someone else it might. And it might be one of the most useful things that other person hears. So there's that thing to consider too as well.
Yeah, I wanted to touch upon, you mentioned how friends could keep you honest, and for me, that quality of honesty was something that was literally taught to me from reading Rose's material and looking at his life, how important self-honesty is. But it almost sounds like for you, that was something that you just naturally realized or naturally took to, that, I really should listen to other people. Sometimes they can see me better than I can see myself. it surprises me, is why I bring it up, that, most people are content just stuck in their own heads and defending their beliefs rather than questioning them.
Oh, well, I don't want to set myself up as kind of like this. It's not actually true because before 30, the age of 30, I was the most superficial guy you'd ever want to come across. All I wanted to do was party, sleep with women, get drunk, beef my mates. Australia would call them mates.
Mm-hmm.
And just generally have a good time with life. And I was not very deep at all. I mean, the only things I would read in those days would be probably science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
But another turning point, I guess, I was talking about multiple turning points, was I was with a lady who we had a relationship, and she basically told me that I would never make anything of myself, which drove me to that suicide attempt. I came out of that kind of like, right, I'm going to show you. So there was this determination to, it wasn't so much an introspection as much as I'm going to show someone else what I'm capable of. And that took me off to university.
Uh-huh.
So, my whole psychotherapy thing started off as revenge. There was nothing noble about it.
Right. Yep. I can relate.
And it's funny because years later, I won this, not meaning to brag or, put myself overly prideful, but I won this award for the university that basically would be the equivalent in America would be winning something like the best student at a university there.
Mm-hmm.
Across all disciplines, every student in that whole thing, you're the one. So I won this award, and I got into local newspapers here, and had a picture with me holding this award, and I was thinking, stuff you, that's I've shown you now.
Yeah.
So I had this kind of like, we were talking about honesty, but so when I first started in psychology, I kind of thought, I want to go into psychology because I want to help people. That was what I was telling myself. But I wasn't being particularly self-honest. The real reason, it wasn't one reason, there was multiple reasons. But, that revenge motive drove it, and I wasn't being honest with that. And so one of the things that really I'm fascinated with is how we can be so ignorant to our own kind of like ways that we tell lies to ourselves.
Yeah.
We're just so blind. And I mean ignorant in the sense of stupid. I mean ignorant in the sense of just unaware. And so this whole, I was a very unaware guy to the age of 30. So that's why when I've got a young client that's on the spiritual search and they're looking at themselves, I'm like, wow, how do you do that? Like, I was never like that. I was the complete opposite of that. But so out of suffering, I think, is the main point, that, out of that crucible of suffering, it kind of like turned my life around a little bit in that I would never give up again. And I would just had this fascination with exploring myself and the world and others. And so psychology was a good fit. It was nothing like I imagined it to be, but at the time I thought it'd be a good fit. So do I have a natural inclination to just do that? I don't think it is. I think it's more, again, I don't want to make a thing out of a religion out of suffering, but it was born out of this whole experience of being in a deep state of pain that kind of like switched my life around a bit and kind of got me to think about, I don't want to go there again.
Right.
And if I didn't want to go there again, I'd have to do things differently. I'd have to open up myself to different things.
Right.
And like we're talking about honesty, but I actually walked down life for, I don't know, probably nearly 30 years of my life thinking I was dumb, stupid. Literally, And it wasn't until I got to university that I thought, hey, I might actually have brains. When I started to do well at university, like academically, it was like a big, massive kind of like boost to my ego and my confidence and esteem. And So things like that interact and kind of all play a part into bringing you to certain points in life. So it's not only the pain, but also the positive experiences that we have, that they kind of like mix, coalesce, and allow us to get to where we want. Why do we lie to ourselves? I mean, that's a fascinating question to me. And I think it's because we're taught to.
Speaking for myself, even when I was on a path where I was trying to be as honest as possible, there were certain aspects of myself that I was so deeply attached to or identified with that I could not see. I could not see them. And even if someone pointed them out, my reaction would be, well, I don't know about that. It was never like, oh my God, I never realized that before. I'd have to think about it, and then slowly over time, it just kind of stuck with me until it.
Absolutely. I was very similar. I remember, great woman, great therapist, and we're talking about intuition and talking about a particular client, and I said something along the lines. She goes, "How did you know that?" And I said, "Well, I intuited that. It was intuition." And she called me out on it and said, "No, you're hiding behind your own theory. That's not intuition." And I just did not want to know about it. I was like, "No, you're wrong. It's intuition. Eddie's right. You're wrong." That sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And then it stuck with me for some reason in my head. And the more I thought about it over the next couple of days, weeks, months, was like, you know what? She's actually right. So it wasn't this instant kind of like, oh, okay, I see what you get. It's kind of like more a mulling.
Yeah.
Kind of like a thinking over process. It tends to work like that for me as well.
Yeah. Now, I know that you don't want to get into too much detail about this, but there was a point in time that you had an awakening of some sort, or this
Yep.
period after 30 of questioning and really digging deeply. It came to an end. Can you tell people just a little bit about that?
Yeah. When I say an end, it's kind of like a fallacy too, but it was an end to kind of like the searching for an answer, if you like.
Mm.
And the ending was more about like, there's only this, which sounds very trite and very kind of like not very deep at all, but in actual sense, it's just this emptiness, which is actually something. And after that, it was kind of like what's the right word? An integration. And I'm still going with the integration. It's probably been about 12 years now. And I don't mean in the sense of a deepening, but from that awakening, if you like, or from that experience, what were the things about that, or what can I talk about that's kind of like makes sense to me? It's not that I can say anything about the awakening. Like, if you can actually talk about your awakening, then it's not an awakening.
Yeah.
Because you're not there.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that you take away from it, I think, is that you're not there. And that has kind of like implications for how you live your life from then on. But also, when you're not there, there's this kind of like, I know this sounds really corny, but there's this massive sense of a very deep, benign sort of love. I don't mean love in the sense of like how we would normally use it in our day-to-day kind of like language and way we interact with people, but much, much further than that. And love is really the wrong word, but it's just about as close as I can get to it. And so then it becomes about how do you live your life honouring that? And that's what's been integrating for me. It's more about a gradual progression of how do I honour those things from that experience and after that experience more faithfully, more honestly in my life. And I think spiritual integration, I've actually been asked to write an article about that, which I might do one day. It's about that. It's about that kind of process of aligning yourself with the qualities that you think are most alike. to that awakening process.
Mm-hmm.
And, to me, one of them is that kind of like love. This whole thing about not getting involved, like don't put ego into the equation. It was a biggie. Relaxing became even bigger. And in fact, a lot of my tension just dropped right off. Because why worry? Things are just going to work out as they're going to work out anyway. So it takes a load off. But at the same time, I don't want to make it like you're lazy and don't do things. You do a lot. You're still active, or I am. It's more about that whole process of trying to do the best that you can from what you've been shown.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying. I know we probably met by email a decade or so ago.
Yeah.
And you kind of, at least to my impression, you sprang onto the scene with a website and a lot of very interesting and intriguing writings. And it seemed like there was a period of time that you kind of vanished for a while. Was that part of this integration or trying to come to terms more? Yeah.
There were a couple of things happening with that. Well, one was that I was starting to become a guru. And I didn't want to be a guru.
Mm-hmm.
And two, I had this kind of like, I think it's Stephen Norquist, and his, you might put that in the show notes. His kind of like awakening where there was this kind of like withdrawal.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to withdraw. I wanted to be by myself even more. And it's not a thing I can explain in a rational way. There was just this overpowering sense of be by yourself. Drop all the teaching, drop all the website stuff, and that's basically what I did for a couple of years. And that whole period of being by myself then sort of like reflected into coming back out of it with, well, what do I do now? And I make it sound like there's this massive problem about what I'm doing now. It wasn't quite like that, but it just seemed clear to me to kind of like, okay, you're a psychotherapist. I think you're reasonably good at it. Start that up again. Start writing some articles again. So slowly I've kind of like been pushing myself back up to be more out in the web and out there and kind of trying to help people, but also with this kind of like aspect of being alone. So I actually adore being alone, but I also adore being with people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's balancing those two things in my life. So another thing that came out of that whole awakening later on, I'm not talking about there was this moment I had an awakening and I had all these ideas about life. It was more like, gradually over time, things kind of like built up and made a lot more sense. It was about balance, being in balance. And me being such an extreme person, working on extremes emotionally and psychologically and almost manic in some ways, I had to focus down on being balanced in life. And being balanced to me kind of also gives you more space to allow things to just occur without actually being overly involved in them. So you're much more able to kind of like sit with things that mightn't make a whole lot of sense and just take them in and absorb them more at a cellular level rather than thinking about, what's that about? I've got to analyse that. I've got to work this out. What's the next book? What's the next answer? But I think if you balance, you're much more likely to kind of like find what you're looking for in life. I mean, they go hand in hand. It's like, not that you balance and you get things out. It's that you balance. You've got to keep working at your balance as you go along. And that's pretty much any quality that you can think of. Is you work at it.
Mm-hmm.
So awakening to me was kind of like, it was a moment in life where things turned a little bit more again. But I look back at that and sort of like think where I am today and would I still be here today if it wasn't for that awakening? And I'm kind of like leaning towards the proposition that I might well be. Perhaps maybe not quite as far along, if you like, or I think that if I look at it and I can sort of like see almost everything that come out of that can be done by someone without having an awakening experience. I'm not talking about the awakening itself. I'm talking about the aftermath and how you live your life and all that.
I see. And is that realization part of why it sounds like you're focused as much or more on the psychotherapy these days in terms of using that to help people as opposed to advising on the spiritual search explicitly?
Yeah, I think that's a truism. Although I have to say that a lot of my clients have this spiritual curiosity, if you like. They're quite spiritual in themselves. And it's not like I've completely dropped off. I still write articles on spirituality, and if people have got questions, I welcome them, and they can email me and all that. But basically, my focus has been on helping people through psychotherapy and me being a therapist. But it usually involves a spiritual component as well. And so my therapy, I can't see it how it could not be a spiritual thing as well, other than if someone just wanted something very specific, like, can you help me with a headache? And that's all they wanted. There wouldn't be much kind of like talk about spirituality in that. But generally speaking, I tend to draw people that have got some curiosity about themselves, and some curiosity about how to live life, and some curiosity about God, and spirituality, and So I have tended to focus on it. And the other reason too is, how do you teach someone an awakening to be awakened?
Yeah.
We are ridiculously poor at that. People will point to these books, these supposedly spiritual texts, but people don't get awakened from them. Or very rarely do they. It's not like we have this massive outpouring of awakened people coming from all these religious, texts and all that. It's just,
right.
Now, if we think about it in terms of success, we suck.
Mm-hmm.
We're terrible at it. And I don't know of any technique, anything that I can say that would help someone get spiritually awakened.
Mm-hmm.
What I can do is, if someone wants to build up their kind of like, I think I've mentioned this in an email to you, that if someone, for example, wanted to have a bit more tenacity in life, or a bit more grit, a bit more purity of purpose, well, I can help with that. And that might be a step towards kind of like, towards something a bit greater. So that's how I look at things. I think of things more like on the micro level, rather than, that whole macro, I'm going to get you enlightened sort of thing. I tell a lot of things. Well, what practically can I do to help people move, to help people shift? Most spiritual seekers are stuck. They're stuck in this kind of like repetition pattern. So the question then becomes, how do I get them unstuck? How do I help them get them unstuck?
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same as in psychotherapy. It's, people are generally stuck. How do you help them get unstuck? What are their patterns of their lives? What needs to change? What's the next step for them? That sort of thing. So I'm more focused on that kind of like, what's the next step, rather than what's the end point. And there isn't an end point. There's just like, we think of awakening as kind of like, oh, that's it. It's all done. Might as well curl up the toes and dig myself a grave, and it's all over with. But in fact, it's just a start.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole process goes on after that. That you still learn about things. I'm still learning about life. I read practically every day something about how we work. I don't read hardly anything at all on spirituality. it just kind of like dropped completely off for me. All that sort of like non-dual sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I find that almost useless. So yeah, there's this whole notion of, do we actually help people by having spiritual enlightenment as kind of like, I can help you get spiritually enlightened? And I would say, no, we don't. As a general rule, you can get some really exceptional teachers, like spiritual teachers, but they're really hard to find. At least that's my experience of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a couple of things come to mind. One is that as we were talking, I recognize I tend to incorrectly draw a bright line between psychotherapy and spirituality, as if the two are separate tracks. But I appreciate your explanation of how the two bleed
and there's
into
also
each other.
There's also the other side of the coin. Like in psychotherapy, I've had a couple of clients that have done this, and they might recognise themselves as I'm talking about it if they listen to the interview. But they were reading books on non-duality and all that sort of be present and be in the now. And we were talking about spirituality, and I said, look, none of that is spiritual, right? You're reading about non-dual stuff, Ali lets you talk in a, this kind of like language, and it's not spiritual. It's very superficial. What's really important is that you're here in therapy working on yourself. That's what's actually spiritual. And it's that working on yourself that actually might actually turn the odds in your favour towards an awakening. It's not that there's a guarantee there, but the probability shifts a little bit. And shifts towards in your favour. And I think as long as we're working on ourselves, and often reading is not working on ourselves. I mean, how many non-dual books could you read, really? How many books on spirituality can you read? Don't they all say the same thing, pretty much? Don't all teachers pretty much say the same thing? So I have this notion in my head about, all right, well, that, practically speaking, hasn't worked really well, in terms of history. What can I do that's a little bit different? And so I've come up with this notion of exploring the little things that go into the processes. And I don't have a big distinction between what is spiritual and what is psychotherapy. To me, they're kind of like, we can talk about distinctions between the two, but they're just so interconnected that I find it difficult to separate them out.
Is the concept of ego something that you use in your work in terms of many people would say that the ego is the great barrier to spiritual awakening?
Yeah. Yes, it is. I'm just pondering your question as you're saying it. So to me, there's often a thing about we need to get rid of ego.
Right.
But I don't think that's correct. I think it's more about how do we manage ego? So a metaphor that I would use, or analogy, is think of ego as a mischievous little puppy dog that gets into trouble a lot. And your role, like as an observer, observing this ego, getting into trouble, getting into mischief, is to kind of like say, all right, pull it up and stop that, but also give it praise when it does something well. So, there's this notion you shouldn't have ego in a spiritual search, but I think you actually need a pretty big ego. I think you need to kind of like stroke it, manage it, get to a certain point, and then it falls away again. Then build it back up again, it goes back down again. Then build it back up again, and it goes back down again. So I think you need an ego to kind of like push yourself. What's more arrogant than being on a spiritual search? If that's not ego, what isn't?
I agree. Yeah.
So you kind of like need your ego to kind of like get there, but your ego is also a thing to me to be managed. It's not something that you get rid of. I've still got an ego. I try and push it to one side and manage it as well as I can. But it's not like it's missing. It's more like I can observe it now, and in that sense, I'm not really there. Like in the sense of there's something else actually happening, rather than what the ego. Like before, the identification was with the ego. Now I am ego. And now it's more like okay, there's this kind of like awareness of ego, for lack of better wording. So yeah, ego's to me, like in therapy, in spirituality, in life in general, it's like you've got to get it out of the way. I'm actually writing an article at the moment, and I might send it to you later on when I finish it, about how we go about getting what we want from life. And part of it, that I'm not going to be writing about is ego. And ego can be the block to getting what we want from life, because we kind of like think that we're going to get it from ego. Whereas most often, it's when we're out of the way, things happen in our favour. It's more often that we have to let it go, that things start working in our favour, rather than kind of like interjecting ourselves all the time. And then the other thing about ego is that I've been giving this a lot of thought of lately, the last couple of years, is that we're a society that kind of like values making the unconscious conscious, and values our thinking above all else. And in my experience, it's kind of like a faulty perception. Our thinking doesn't actually do a whole lot. It's more our intuition. It's more our awareness of ourselves, not in the sense of making the unconscious conscious, but just moment to moment, kind of like being present in life without having ego interject into everything and trying to control everything. That's really useful for people. And so that's reflected in therapy as well. It's kind of like, getting back to your original question, I can waffle along, can't I? You have this kind of like idea that, that we've got to get ego into everything to make a better life. But in therapy, I try and teach people just be present. Just relax, let it go. That's not the whole of therapy, of course, and there's lots and lots of different things I do. But one of the biggies is that most people don't know how to relax. Not just in therapy. You look around and friends and people in the street, and we walk around like stress balls, basically. We just don't know how to relax. So there's some basics there in therapy that I think are really useful for spirituality as well. That you've got to have the foundations right before you get on to the next step, if you like. And part of the foundations to me is that kind of like ability to be aware of your body, to have a more intuitive sense of how to navigate the world. And part of it is the ability to let go of stuff that's really, in the end, inconsequential and unimportant.
Yeah, I'm glad you explained that more, because a person might hear, well, we just need to relax is the thing. And to me, that could mean, I just need to turn on the TV set and kick back on the couch and take it easy more often.
That's not what I mean.
Actually saying. Yeah.
No. Actually, just to illustrate that point a bit deeper, is that I've had people that do a lot of mindfulness. And even then, in their mindfulness experience, they're not relaxed. And so I might ask them to notice their body and go deeper into that. And it's that deepening of that, and just letting it go, just relaxing into it, actually brings about some quite profound changes and insights, if you like. So there's that aspect of it too. It's just like you really got to, when I say relax, it's not just getting on the couch. It's not what I mean. I mean, really just like even right now as we're talking, I'm aware of my body and I'm relaxing it moment to moment to moment. And so you live your life kind of like in this state of, rather than being against everything in life, you're trying to be for everything in life. And part of that is learning to let go of control, And there's times where you need to be in control. I'm not saying that you don't. But generally speaking, if we let go of ego, things tend to run much, much better. And part of that, if you think about it, the more you have ego in it, the more you're not relaxed usually. If you think about the times that you really inject yourself into an equation in some way, you're usually a bit hyper and a bit kind of like your body tenses up a little bit, and you're not quite as relaxed as what you might be.
You mentioned that you're working more with the unconscious than with the conscious. Could you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I guess what I was trying to get at before too with that whole society is focused on the conscious and like making the unconscious conscious. Whereas I'm quite happy to leave things at an unconscious level at times. And so what is a driver? What is our driver? What actually gets us from A to B? And we can say God and all that. Yes, we can do that. But at a more practical level, it's the unconscious. But we tend to think of it more as it's the conscious that's kind of like getting us from A to B. But what we now know from research and from science is that that's not accurate at all. In fact, all the conscious mind is a storyteller, and a storyteller after the fact. Now think about what I'm saying there. Everything that we think about is after the fact. But we could also use that to kind of like shine a light. Like I use the metaphor of a lighthouse that, it shines a light and it kind of like, all right, I want to be over here at this point in life. It's like a vision for life. So our conscious mind can do that. But what actually gets us from the unconscious to the conscious, what actually gets us to that point is the unconscious. That's where it's all at. That's where the power is at. So over the years, I'm developing a more thorough understanding that it's really the unconscious that's kind of like where it's all at, and it's got the power, and it's also the portal to the more spiritual type of experiences. And we can think about dreams and synchronicity and intuitions. They're not conscious processes; they're unconscious processes. And if we think about life, like there's times in my life where I thought, I know it, I know what to do. I should be doing this, but instead, the unconscious is kind of like driving me off in a completely different direction and getting me into trouble and not actually following what I actually want to do in life. So in that sense, our conscious minds are quite limited, and our unconscious ones are the ones that really drive us. Which, if you look at the literature and in the past, we've kind of like been focused on this real tiny aspect of ourselves and kind of like almost been dismissive of the unconscious of what we can do with it. So I'm really keen to kind of like learn more about it and explore more and work with people on that level.
Mm-hmm.
And I see more potential in that than something like a more cognitive behavioral type approach. Mm-hmm. You're going to ask something?
Is there any general advice that you can give to people who would be listening to this if they wanted to explore more deeply into the unconscious? I think you mentioned dream work is one thing. Any other?
Dream work is one thing. First of all, the most important thing is you've got to develop a relationship with the unconscious. So, and by that I mean you have an inward kind of like relationship with it. So if you have a dream, the relationship to yourself is just as important as anything as the interpretation. Just the acknowledgement that the unconscious is there. So we talk about that little puppy dog, and part of that is the unconscious, that it doesn't get any kind of like credit for what it actually does in our lives. Some practical things is, yes, dream work is very good. I would watch for synchronicities. And in particular, don't fall for the trap of interpreting the synchronicities as this is showing me where I need to be in life. It's not a signpost that says you've got to go here. It's more like, this is an opportunity to explore myself. There's something about this. that gives me an opportunity to explore myself. So synchronicity is a bit more like that.
Mm-hmm.
Sickness is often a very unconscious thing. So my heart attacks, for example, were born out of my heart psychologically breaking. And a lot of my illnesses, like, people don't know, but like even as we're talking now, I've got pain. All of these have psychological roots, and they're by and large, we leave them into the unconscious and we dismiss the potential for healing because we do. So the broken heart scenario is one. So I got a couple of really bad relationships that broke my heart, and then years later, my heart literally broke a couple of times, like, physically broke.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a relationship between that's quite unconscious. And so there's value in kind of learning about, okay, if I want to be healthy, I better start addressing some of the psychological things. And also some of the spiritual things involved in that. What's the repercussions? What are the repercussions of me dying? What happens?
Mm-hmm.
I don't have an answer, but I know what happens in the end, but I don't mean it in the sense of dying. I mean, where the whole show is ended. But, it's those sorts of things that you can integrate into your life and make them a little bit more, kind of like shine the light on them and then get your unconscious to work towards that. And the way I think is, one, to be aware of where you want to be in your life is the big step. So my biggest advice to people would be this. If you know where you're going in life, you're likely going to get there. And the way to know where you're going in life is have a vision, then have goals to get to that vision, and then have daily intentions to keep those goals working, and look at all the blocks that prevent you from getting what you want. And it's the blocks that we often miss out on, where, ego's involved. So the less you put yourself into that whole equation, the better it is for you. And the more precise you are with your vision, the more likely it is that it's actually going to come to fruition. And I was just going to say that vision doesn't need to be very conscious.
That's what I was just going to ask.
Yeah. Your vision doesn't actually need to be very conscious. Like, I actually prefer it. That you kind of like almost have it unconsciously. Relegate it to the unconscious. Don't pay that much importance to it. But come back to it every couple of months and revise it if you need to, so that your unconscious is aware of it. The vision itself should be more unconscious. The conscious parts are more the intention, because it's a daily practice. So we don't often think of intention as a daily practice, but to me, it should be a daily practice. It should be, I'm going to get out of bed, I intend to do this and that today. And you need to do that every day. So that's a conscious part of it, but the big one is the vision. If you don't have a vision, you're aimless, you're lost. You're just going to get you're going to get nowhere in life, basically, if you don't have a vision. Because you don't know where you're going.
Right.
Just, I don't know if that helps at all, but it's a big, big topic, Sean. Yeah. It's like something that I could talk about for hours and hours and hours, and we'd still only be, scraping the surface of it, sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you a couple of shorter questions. I always like to hear from...
Am I an Aussie? Yes.
I always like to hear from people, for example, if there's any book that they tend to recommend more than another.
Tao Te Ching. That's really the only book you will ever need spiritually. But I kind of like Ed McKenna's first book. What's it called? Spiritual Enlightenment, The Damnedest Thing.
Yeah.
Because it removes some of the mystique about enlightenment and kind of like, I think, helps people, clarify for people, don't get stuck into these kind of like normal views of enlightenment. Don't get stuck into the whole kind of like, you're going to get enlightened, everything's going to be all right afterwards. So they're probably the other two I would recommend to people.
And how about films? Are there any movies, documentaries that you've
I
seen?
love, I love American Beauty.
Ah, yeah.
It's kind of like, that's it. You only need that. um, yeah, I'll leave it at that, actually. I'll leave it at American
Yeah,
Beauty.
all right.
It's a fantastic film.
Mm-hmm.
And captures things about life that are, people might think that the guy who's playing that observer role is the one that's awakening. But I actually see the guy who's rebelling a bit more, Kevin Spacey, is actually a bit closer to the way that you would go about awakening, because he's rebelling against everything. And then I actually wrote a piece about this some time ago that I've lost now. But if you integrate the two, then you've got a perfect student, and they still wouldn't get awakened. But to me, that's just a fantastic film with metaphor upon it. That plastic bag scene, it just, I don't know. I know you like it, but it's just something I fell in love with.
Yeah.
Just hit me home. Yeah. Next question.
Well, this one's actually,
Is that it?
this one's actually might be a little bit longer, but then we'll wrap up after this one.
Okay.
You had made the statement that the whole "you are perfect," there is just this crowd, while kind of a truism, typically have a lot of resistances, and that their bodies at some level are resisting. A lot of people I come across are like that, carrying around this dissonance without really being aware of it. And I was curious if you could speak at all to what are some of the symptoms of that?
Well, that mindfulness example I gave earlier on, where people, I've had people and kind of like not even realise that they're tense in some way. So an exercise I might do with them is like, think about your body and think about a certain position in your body. Is there anywhere in your body where it might be a little bit more tense or a little bit more relaxed than the other part? So as they focus in, they might actually get to a specific point. And I might ask them, what does that feel like? Is it a ball? What kind of shape does it have? So we're really getting into the specifics of kind of like what this thing is in their body. And eventually I'll get to a point of, can you go deeper into that? Can you explore that a little bit more? What does it want to tell you? Just close your eyes, sit with yourself quietly as possible. And don't think about a rational answer. Just pop out whatever comes into your mind. And as people do that, they're kind of like, there's a couple of things that come out of that. One is they don't realise that they've had so much tension in their body. And two is that they don't realise that something within their body can actually teach them something about themselves. There's this, psychological component as well, which also has spiritual implications. They're all interconnected. We can't get away from that. So that would be, I think, a pretty good example of working, with resistance. We carry around resistances without really knowing it. A spiritual seeker is often one of the most resistant people, because you kind of like get locked into this viewpoint that awakening is going to be like this.
Oh, yeah.
When it happens.
Yep.
And it just isn't. I mean, you can't explain it, but it just isn't what they think it's going to be. And so they're resisting, by being so locked in, they're resisting all these other opportunities in life. They're resisting the openness. They're resisting other ways of being in life. And because they're resisting, that's got to be reflected at a physiological level as well. And so part of what I'm working towards is, all right, let's look at the body. Let's start from there rather than look at the mind. And then how does that body relate to the mind? That sort of thing. So instead of a top-down view, it's more like a bottom-up view, building up into kind of like the mind and how they're all interconnected. And so far that's been, people have found that quite useful. And, they're often, as I said, they're often surprised at their own level of resistance. And I understand why the resistance. I was, even more resistant than what they were in lots of ways. But we walk around pretty resistant to life in many ways. I don't think that's a great way of living our lives.
Mm-hmm. So if people want to find more about what you're up to, or they want to get in touch with you, what should they do?
Get on a plane and come to Australia.
And now, are you in a nice part of Australia, or are you out in the desert somewhere?
Everywhere is nice in Australia, Sean. Come on.
I don't want it to be hot, okay? It's got to be...
No, I'm in quite a place where the weather can change about 4 times during the day, and it can get very hot here as well.
Oh.
So, but Melbourne's a very beautiful city.
Okay.
But to answer your question, they can get me by website, edwardtraversa.com. And also, if they've got questions, they can email me at etraversa@hotmail.com. They're the 2 main avenues. And, if they need to kind of like have a bit more of an in-depth discussion, we can do that on Skype or, something like that.
Got it. Nice. Well, thank you, Eddie. That's all the questions I have for you.
Well, that's brilliant. I really enjoyed it. I hope it's useful for your listeners, and be interesting to hear the whole interview when it's finished.